thank you for joining us this Friday evening or Saturday morning. We're thrilled to be hosting a discussion with Kylie Ng of 500 Global, Eddie Chen of Intuitive Ventures, Bing Tran of Ascent Vietnam Ventures, and Samin An of Rakuten at this webinar to learn of their adventures and journeys in discovering unicorns in Southeast Asia. It is a very exciting time to be in the region today. Its innovation ecosystem, supported by a 650 million young and tech-savvy population, is rapidly growing and full of new opportunities, and we are most honored to have with us here 4 top Gun VCs in the region. Before we start the discussion, let me give you some background information of our organization. Named after the highest mountain in Taiwan, Monty Jade Science and Technology Association was established by a group of Asian high-tech executives and leaders in Silicon Valley. The initial driving force was to bring the high-tech experts from the Bay Area and those across the Pacific together. Monty Jade was chosen to signify excellence of the highest level. The association incorporated as a nonprofit organization and held its opening ceremony on 4th February 1990 in San Jose, California. Our list of founding committee includes global industrial leaders, namely Mr. Terry Guo of Foxconn, Mr. Stan Shi of Acer, and Mr. Li Butan of Cadence, amongst many other distinguished members. The association's mission is to promote the cooperation and mutual flow of technology and investment. It aims to provide a platform for professionals and corporations on both sides of the Pacific to network and share valuable experiences in business opportunities, investments, technology, and information exchange. Through this community, billions of dollars of enterprise value were created and hundreds of companies were formed. Even to this day, Monty Jade West continues to build communities under these 3 pillars. The first pillar is our interview series focused on celebrating notable community leaders who understanding their personal journey and how they overcame some of the many challenges they face. This focus on the journey helps us to better connect great people to the next generation of leaders. The second pillar is focused on technology forums in which we bring to our community new ideas. This enables Monty Jade members to discover new opportunities for investments or careers. Recently, we have held talks on venture investing, AI, biosciences, renaissance of the semiconductor industry, etc. And this webinar is a great example of these forums. The last but most important pillar is our mentorship program. This volunteer-run program focuses on building the skill sets needed for future leaders. Eastern Asians are underrepresented in the leadership of many Bay Area technology companies. Today, Asians continue to lag their peers in being promoted. White males are promoted 2 times the rate of Asian males, while white females are promoted 3 times the rate of Asian females. This disparity has gotten worse over the last 2 decades, and our mentorship program strives to help address this inequality. The 6-month-long mentorship program focuses on education and deep engagement with small mentor families to help address some of the challenges of moving up the corporate ladder. And this year, we are proud to have more than 60 mentees in our program. And now, I would like to pass the mic to Peter Chu, our Monty Jade West former chairman, who will be moderating the panel discussion this evening. Thank you all again, and I hope you enjoyed the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Z, for a great opening, and thanks, Mount Jade, for putting this together again.
Thank you.
I'm here because I can't stop working for Mount Jade. As Z has said, it is an organization with a lot of history. I was on the board over a decade ago, but I am still very actively engaged as a mentor to mid-career Asian Americans, because as Z said, there's a great need to support the community of professionals, leaders, to create sort of a lot of the miracles that are happening in Silicon Valley every day. My own career has been half in growth and startup companies. I started with a company called Oracle. I don't think you can call that a unicorn. I call that more like a rhinoceros these days. But I'm still very, very actively involved in the investment as well as startup arena. I also spent half my career in venture capital myself. Compared to what these guys are doing now, that seemed like just baby steps back then. But at the same time, I've been on both sides of the table, and I hope to sort of maybe guide this sort of seminar, webinar into areas where everybody in the audience, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are an investor, or you're someone who's just interested in something that's new, something very exciting, we hope to shed some of the lights on that. Mount Jade has always been a bridge across the Pacific. I remember when we first started, we had panels on PC industry, the semiconductor boom was like, wow, everybody came to Mount Jade because for someone who, for organizations straddling sort of both sides of the Pacific, we were at the epicenter. And we talked about internet boom, but now I think we're always on the forefront looking for what's next. And Southeast Asia, to be honest, personally, I think I missed it. I missed what's happening out there. But what we're now seeing is that, having learned something from our great panelists here, it is the place where it's counter-cycle. For all the concerns that we have for economies, changing supply chains, and a lot of the woes and concerns, there seems to be a bright spot in Southeast Asia. I'll let my sort of our panelists really take us there. So you've read, let's get into it, right? But before we get there, I want to thank my friend Steve Shah, who's put together this series of focus webinar on Southeast Asia. Steve was himself an entrepreneur out in that area for a decade plus. And that's why these are people he knows, people he's sort of invited to join us to give us tremendous insight into what's happening out there. By the way, Steve's also working. Steve will be collecting a lot of the Q&As. We will allot some time towards the end of the seminar to bring up some of the questions from the audience to directly interact with our panelists here. And so let's get right into it. You've read the impressive bio, so I'm not going to get into it in the Eventbrite page and so forth. And you can look up LinkedIn. There's plenty of information about what they've done. But here's sort of a short version. First, we have, Kylie Ying, managing partner of 500 Global. What I see in Kylie's background is that he's one of the first and the biggest sort of community organizers in Malaysia. Founder of the largest media company, media.com, and a large buying group acquired by Groupon. But now he's a unicorn rider, with at least 5 unicorns to ride, probably more, to ride to work each day of the week. And then next we have Eddie Chen. He's the founding partner of Intudo Ventures. This is an Indonesia-only venture. Now, Eddie's background, boy, I can't even keep track anymore. He was an investment banker. He was a corporate lawyer, and then he decided he could switch to the industry side, spent time at PayPal, Palantir, Affirm, all the names that we hear about. And that's where he built his personal network. And he used the word, this creates a serendipity for him to launch into building this new venture ecosystem out in Indonesia. More from him later. Let's talk about Bin Tran, general partner Ascend Vietnam Ventures. If I may say, humble beginnings, like many of us, started as a developer, as a game developer. But then, years of hard work took him to a founding company like Clout. Klein & Perkin founded, big exit, and that earned him sort of the interest or pivot into working for 500 startups. He worked in San Francisco as well as Vietnam, but now he runs his own venture fund, Vietnam-focused fund, Ascend Vietnam Ventures. Last but not least, Se Min An, managing partner, Rakuten Ventures, headquartered in Singapore, but managed the global investment portfolio. Starting as a marketing expert in Korea for different web properties, I saw names such as fortune telling for Match.com, very interesting little insights. But then eventually worked his way into building a Google ecosystem for partnerships in APAC. That's a while back, but he's also spent, I think, almost 7 to 8 years now at Rakuten. So what we have here are people who are not leading investors with some of the biggest name, with very, very focused approach, creating amazing, call it companies that are unicorn category. But what I love about them is that they've been on both sides of the table, right? They started out building companies, and now they're helping many others build even, well, I don't know if they're bigger companies, but the next generation of companies. So let's get straight into it. I like to start, just go around a bit and maybe start with Kylie. Let's jump into, tell us a little bit about the Southeast Asian market, where you invest, and give us a flavor of the kind of sectors and some representative deals.
Yeah. So, okay. So, as you kind of duly pointed out, I've been investing in Southeast Asia for a while now. This month, mid this month would mark my 10th year as an investor. Now, with investing in Southeast Asia, we 500 Global, formerly known as 500 Startups, we have two areas of focus. The first one is on early stage. So in early stage, we cut up to 500K US dollars, and then we've got a growth stage practice that we've cut so far $5 to $7 million, 2 to 3. Our largest check we've done was a Series C in Carousell, and that was 21 million US dollars. So for us, like, we like to get involved in companies when they're even as early as idea stage, all the way up to pre-IPO, where we can work with our LPs to assemble SPVs to support the companies before they go public. So this kind of like multi-stage approach is predicated on really getting a big pipeline of good companies early on. Now, in terms of like sectors, of course, I mean, for us to get a very large pipeline, we actually invest in many sectors. We build broad-based, diversified portfolios. We want every fund to have at least 20 to 30 non-correlated sectors. So that way, if a sector is just too hype and then something, is like, didn't really work out, it's okay. You got 29 more sectors to go, right, for you to deliver like large unicorns later. So far that strategy has worked out very well. We've, gotten to know in the first 21 investments we made in 2014, we had Grab, Carousell, Bukalapak, Panelists, Carsome. So 3 of them are already public. 2 of them go public very soon. Our 2015, 16, 17, 18 vintage, they're tracking very well with companies like Stockbit and eFishery, which will probably become unicorns very soon, FinExcel, so on and so forth. So I'm happy to talk about quite a wide range of sectors today, if there's any interest in anything specific. But I think when you think about 500 Global, you think of a very large funnel of different sectors, and then we double down on like the big winners as they go public.
Wow, that's a lot to cover, and I'm sure that keeps you very, very busy. Why don't we kind of jump over to Saemin? Similarly, I mean, you have even broader view, but then also I know that you also do different stages. Can you tell a little bit about your investment sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be here. One thing that Rakuten Venture does specifically is, even though we're a corporate venture capital firm, we've put financial return at the forefront of how we want to actually run our business. We invest in good companies. We invest in companies that we think the verticality of it, how they actually can compress the margins of their business. The core mechanisms and the physics of their business is actually what attracts us to them. It's not necessarily the verticals that we're interested first. It's more about, if we found a company that we actually think about thematically, maybe in the next 2 or 3 quarters, that thinks, okay, this sort of vertical can actually get into, say, an AI field, but also monetize it and have a very good managed service. There is a great way of adding more and more layers of monetization on top of that. So we've actually taken a more private equity approach to this. As you say, we have a global mandate. We can invest in everyone from a company in San Francisco to a company in Cairo. We don't have any limitations. But what we've done is, when we've actually found the theme and kind of the business model make that we like, we really doubled down on those companies. So some of those companies are, including but not limited to Carousell, Goto, Byju's, and whatnot. So it's been a very interesting 10 years for myself also.
Hey, Saemin, I want to sort of pull back a little bit. I remember in a prior conversation to you, used the word, this region has become the safe harbor. Can you talk about the global setting of money movement? I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, is anyone getting any sleep these days with public equity? I don't think anyone is, right? So let me give you a good insight that I saw about 2 or 3 days ago. What do you think the 30-year return on the MSCI China index is right now? What do you think the return is? 10%, 5%?
Is that my average per year across 30 years?
Yeah, across 30 years. What do you think the average right now is?
Or absolute return from 30 years ago?
Well, so let's take absolute. That's the better marker.
20,000%.
Eddie, jump in as a banker.
So right now, the MSCI index for China has returned 0%. It's given up every single dollar of return that it's had. And do you know, for example, what Singapore's capital inflow is in 2021 alone? Just guess. Yeah, capital inflow. It's $448 billion US dollars in 2021 alone. That's probably in the tier of maybe like the top 8 or 9 countries in total. And this is just a little red dot. MSCI ASEAN index, including China, has overperformed even in these macro turmoil kind of within economics, about 250 basis points above all other markets. So just looking at this macroeconomically, this has been a very good leading indicator for a lot of companies and a lot of corporations and a lot of investors who actually think about investment really, really hard. If you look at like Vietnam alone, every single half year, Vietnam gets about $18 billion of FDI to build semiconductors and sunk cost infrastructure kind of investments. Indonesia, in the past, I believe, 14 months, has had more trade surplus than it has in the past 5 years. So I'm just rattling out figures because I'm very proud of Southeast Asia, but that all computes to being able to get people employed better, to have better education, to have better consumption habits, to be very, very credit oriented, but very productively credit oriented. So those things really give the ability for Southeast Asia to not only weather the storm, but be really the safe harbor that everyone thinks about when they think about safe harbor.
Wow, Samin, this is what I love about it. This is a great tee up for us to go from the regional level and to look at some country specific approach. Let me jump to Bin first. Samin just said Vietnam is getting so much, FDI. What are you seeing as a result of that?
Well, I have to look it through my own lens, which is software, and the ecosystem here. I clock in the inception around 2016. This is when the government stepped in and announced a few things around the digital economy that basically invigorated everyone to start building. But if you look from a regional perspective, the most mature market is Singapore. And I remember moving myself to Singapore in 2009 for a couple months to build the MVP for clout. And at the time, Singaporean government officials would be flying to San Francisco to do direct deals, just to learn about venture capital. So if you think about an entire region, it's still very much in its early phases of growth. And so for me, Vietnam is one of the youngest ecosystems. And one of the things that got me to move here, I never thought I'd be a venture capitalist and actually living in Vietnam. I met my co-founder, Eddie, and my first question was like, hey, here's this Harvard undergrad, Yale MBA. What are you doing out here? And why aren't you in Wall Street? Why aren't you in Silicon Valley? And he really opened my eyes on what was happening over here. And it was very, very humble beginnings. Being able to sell to investors, Vietnam in 2015, 16 was very, very challenging. Right? If you think about the entire venture ecosystem in 2017, there's only $48 million a deal. So you really think about how that's jumped to close to $2 billion in 2021. The rapid growth that's happening here. And so, yeah, when I think about, I guess, Vietnam's role within the region, one of the biggest reasons why we started the fund is that you had this huge population of software engineers, and it's you think about the entire region, Singapore being kind of the Delaware for the region, and then obviously there's software engineers in many different markets, but Vietnam has that largest pool, and so you do see research centers being established here, and folks setting up manufacturing. And so overall, I think we're still in the very earliest stages of VC over here, but that growth and that technology adoption, not just here, but around the region's inevitable. And so that gets us, I think, everyone in this room very excited.
Hey, Vin, can you just add a little bit on, I know you're in software. That seems like one of the hot sectors. What are some of the other couple sectors you can name, and maybe some representative deals that you think are really interesting and unique to Vietnam?
Well, software is a very, very broad category. So, and that's my only category. I mean, I spent most of my life in software and operations before investing. So I think the opportunity over here is quite broad. We are quite sector agnostic just because that adoption of technology is so early, but there are some hotspots. If you think about some of the more recent reports, Vietnam has the highest adoption of crypto in the world per capita. And it's a function of folks who are tech savvy, who have never entered the banking system. They're unbanked. They trust their own judgment on finances. And so that having that control is important. And we've seen companies like Sky Mavis just really create entire new categories. And so what I'm seeing, just from pulling back a bit, in 2018, you had more Asian unicorns being minted outside the US than inside the US. Now you're starting to see more of these market leading, globally leading software companies coming out of Asia, whether it's TikTok or Freshworks out of India, or PUBG out of South Korea, and now Sky Mavis out of Vietnam, completely changing the narrative of Vietnam. And so we're kind of seeing that early ecosystem, the fruits of those ecosystems start to develop, and we're going to see more of that starting to happen. So yeah, blockchain, fintech is a huge category. We think basic building blocks around e-commerce and logistics, definitely education's a huge category spend for all Asians, and I think small business. There's 97% of the enterprises in Vietnam are small businesses. They're getting on the internet. They need services. They need to be able to track their customers, lower the cost centers, increase their margins. But it's a really hard problem to be able to solve at scale. So you have to turn to software and customer-centric technology to be able to address that kind of long tail problem.
So much to do. Sounds like you need to raise a couple more funds to take advantage of all of it. So let me get to Eddie. So Eddie, I know in our conversation, you have your own thoughts on just the label Southeast Asia as a region. Let's start with that. And then, but at the same time, please do address Indonesia, which now I'm looking at number of unicorns coming up. It blew me away. I couldn't believe how many I was looking at.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, on our end, we run, as far as we understand, the only Indonesia-only fund globally, and that we exclusively back Indonesian homegrown companies founded by Indonesians. So I think what that's really allowed us to do is eliminate probably overnight about 65 to 70% of the deals in Southeast Asia overnight. And then once we go deeper and we require an Indonesian co-founder that cut another 10%. So I think just really helped us eliminate a lot of the noise. And I think for us, at least at early stage, we have a view that I think if you were, say, 10 years ago, today you could fly, do some, tom yum soup in Malaysia, you could do some chili crab in Singapore, the next day is just a pho. But I think for early stage today, with an ecosystem that certainly is, grown, by 10x in terms of volume of companies, I think it's really challenging to run such a strategy at early stage unless you have massive AUM where you can have a world-class, executive chef for every dish, like you'd have at the Four Seasons or, maybe at like the Ritz-Carlton. Otherwise, you end up with a very mediocre, like third-tier strip mall experience, right? Where you can't really deliver anything deep. So, and I would say that if you look at the markets today, I think Indonesia is one of, not the only countries that built kind of standalone unicorns without going cross-border. I think one of my key partners, Nick Nash over at Asia Partners, they have this theory about, called category 1 strategy and category 2, where 70% of companies arguably are more regional in nature, maybe 30% are more along the lines of like a Tokopedia or Gojek or Bukalapak that go deep in one country. And maybe once they hit unicorn status and go out, and, we're having an annual meeting, this week, out here in Indonesia for our firm. And I think one interesting stat that we just put out is, first 13 unicorns, at least, homegrown here in Indonesia, I think 11 of them still are just single country, or at least hit unicorn just from single countries. So it's one of the, not the only country we've seen to date that you can kind of go deep, just given that the next 3 markets combined by population don't hit the scale. You may argue that it's poorer, but I'd argue on per capita, maybe, I think Philippines, Vietnam are lower, and then Thailand. So if you even slot all that in just from a call it e-commerce or online commerce perspective, from a GMV perspective, you hit the same scale. So I think that, you're not getting the same efficiencies you get in China and India and the United States, where let's say you put your call center in, whatever, state or province, if it will, as opposed, you need 8 different call centers, you need 8 different legal teams, 8 different, finance teams, and go to market. So I don't think you hit the operational efficiencies, at least at early stage. So we take a very strong view that we run a single country strategy, and it helps us just at least cut out a lot of the noise.
Very good. Thank you for that. So let me bounce back to Kylie, because in some ways, with your very broad portfolio approach, but what I heard interesting was, we have the sort of the big names, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, but I remember you telling me about Pakistan. So tell me about this kind of expansion strategy? Because when you have a Southeast Asia as a region to operate, it seems like there's so unlimited. It's so unlimited in terms of the diversity and other things that you can do beyond just the big names in terms of countries.
Well, first off, Pakistan. I mean, just in case anyone's curious, it's not in Southeast Asia, and I think that conversation was just more about like the big, the big picture of like a growing market.
I moved it over, right?
Yeah. Okay, so Pakistan is not in Southeast Asia. So let's get that clear. But I think that if you're, I mean, if you want to draw like a thread through that, and especially to what Eddie was talking about, Indonesia. So 500 Global as a firm, we've done 2,700 investments in 81 countries, and we look back on our data, and we have 51 unicorns. We see half of them came out non-US, non-China, and non-India unicorns. And we look at the patterns, and we ask ourselves, we're like, okay, well, the world just installed 1.2 billion new smartphones in the past 10 years, 2 billion new internet users. And if we're going to say the next, and the world right now is about 4 billion, give or take, internet users, the next 4 billion, where are they going to come from? And where are all these like 4 billion of those internet users, most of them going to be smartphone users at the rate how cheap they are, right? So then we plotted in 10 years, which are the largest economies in the world. Like so a lot of studies actually point to places like Turkey being like top 5. And so Pakistan is up there too because of its demographics as well. So we've got this what we call internally as the rise of the next type markets. I'm not going to go too deep on that because we're talking about Southeast Asia today. Of course, Indonesia continues to be one of them. But you got a lot of interesting markets like Egypt and whatnot, and they're going to create enough density in the same way like Vietnam has enough density that you're going to have a couple of unicorns coming out of Vietnam. You're going to have a couple of unicorns coming out of Philippines and so on and so forth, right? So there'll be a Eddie Chan of Vietnam. That's been right. So Vietnam only, right? So there's gonna be a ton of like money to be made in a lot of these markets. But pulling it back to Southeast Asia is not as like I would say like frontier, if you will. Southeast Asia is matured. It's not an emerging market. It's emerged. There's like 40 freaking unicorns running around, right? There's 22, like the latest, like what's that internet economy report, $22 billion of dry powder waiting to be deployed into the companies that all of us are backing. 22 billion. They're waiting for good companies right now. They're sitting in the bay. So Southeast Asia has emerged already. So I don't think we need to look too far for this conversation. 500, we'll go on trying to be early in a lot of markets, just like we were super early here in Southeast Asia back in 2014. But right now, anyone who's looking at something a little bit more mature and a bit more ready and a bit safer, like Southeast Asia's regions is the right one for you.
Thank you for framing that properly for me. I appreciate the education. Let me go to Seimin. I mean, let me sort of change the framework a little bit because in some ways we're talking about in the US, we have a certain, let's say, perception of the model of the VC and then the entrepreneur and the ecosystem. You see so much. Can you make some contrast to how it might be, how that framework needs to be tweaked or modified when operating in the Southeast Asia region?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me try to build this in context of what's happening in 2022 and on. I think if you were to look at investments in Southeast Asia, the way that a VC would select their vertical and select their companies to work with, and vice versa, of course, the founder has to make that choice of working with. It would be much more without restrictions or kind of mental barriers compared to a lot of the other developing countries. I say this a little bit more macroeconomically again, in that I see a lot more governments starting to define how their relationship with technology and big tech will be formed. And when that happens, then you understand that the company that you saw, the company's trajectory that you actually predicted might be vastly different from how it could actually be. So in that perspective, I think Southeast Asia specifically, just because the countries as a whole have been always consistently open for the past 10, 15 years for technological innovation, those kind of policy considerations should be much less than other maybe emerging markets or discovery markets here.
Wow, that's excellent insight. So let me take that back to the country specifics. Let me go down to Bin. Bin, When it comes to Vietnam, right, we did try to talk about different sectors, but perhaps can you talk about, in some ways, you're enabling, software can enable sort of make things faster, more efficient, more comprehensive in different industries. What are some of the vertical, carrying on what Simon was saying, that you see are promising examples that you're seeing in your area where technology enablement has really transformed the industry and creating a lot of value?
I mean, you think about what it can't transform, right? And, technology in general, automation, AI, I mean, we are looking at a region that is very much early on just getting connected to the internet and realizing all that value. And so what happens when you get on the internet? Well, you need to find money, food, transportation, all kind of universal basic needs. And those universal basic needs extend to businesses as well. And many of these problems aren't solved yet. And so that demand is unmet. And so when we think about the solutions solving these problems, we try to figure out, like, is this solution applicable to other markets? I think Eddie touched on a little bit. One of the challenges for this region is that you have so many smaller markets, very diverse, a dozen different markets with different ethnicities and languages. And Indonesia is the only market that you don't have to worry about international expansion for scale, for the kind of VC scale we're looking at. And so for me, when I think about the opportunities, there's opportunities everywhere. I want to look at the opportunities that can transcend these ethnic, cultural, language barriers. So a little bit more innovative in their approach. For example, fintech, right? One of the first things you need to do is to understand credit. And so we invested in a company that was later backed by Sequoia that started in Vietnam and entered India and Bangladesh and the Philippines, because those markets, were at the same maturity level in terms of needing credit. Their approach into the market were they had the same type of stakeholders in those markets. And so that type of approach allows us to address the scale problem that's in Vietnam. I mean, there's 100 million people here, but if you're looking at an approach that's using software and innovation to be able to piece those markets together, that kind of removes a little bit of the friction, the natural frictions of entering other markets. But yeah, what kind of value? It's very, very broad.
It means there are too many ways to just make money, which is a good thing. Let me take what Simon said a little bit about the relationship between government and tech and industries, right? And Eddie, I know that that's an interesting question to explore for Indonesia in terms of its recent, I would say, ascendancy to what it's doing so well with. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, definitely. Think that we want to give, President Jokowi a lot of credit. I think that if you're to look at, Indonesia just historically, I think it's positioned itself quite nicely from a geopolitical perspective, saying, kind of friends to all, if you will. So if you look, in the kind of right now, you have U.S.-China kind of trade tensions. Hence, Chinese capital to some extent is, whether it be CFIUS or whatever, a little bit more sensitive than the United States. Similarly, in the decoupled world you're seeing in India, right? Maybe not the most welcome to Chinese capital. So I think if you look at, Southeast Asia as a whole, I think it's kind of benefited in particular Vietnam, Indonesia to some extent as well. So I think that the government's been very open-minded about being both human capital and financial capital into the market, bring that both in to get both, global know-how, as well as, and for a handful of reasons. I think just historically, from a technology perspective, in terms of technical talent, certainly it's been a little bit more challenging. Just, education historically was maybe not as a big portion of GDP, although that is improving. I have to give Vietnam a lot of credit. I think post-Vietnam War, very heavy, focus on STEM, whereas I do think Indonesia is pretty underindexed from a STEM perspective. China, you have 4 million STEM grads here. India, about 3 million. Indonesia is 200,000. I think that might be a little bit of a broader term, given that from a CS perspective, you're just in the tens of thousands. So I think it's really, introducing this omnibus bill, et cetera, really deregulating pretty aggressively, allowing, foreign ownership. So if you look in the called Chinese proxy wars, almost every company in Indonesia, or even Southeast Asia more broadly, once you hit a billion or a unicorn, they have chosen to side, whether it be Alibaba, SoftBank on one side, or Tencent, JD, Meituan on the other side, right? I think Indonesia also has been quite welcome to the United States as well, right? So you see, Google take positions in the market, PayPal take positions in the market, et cetera. So I think, and also with India, right? So I think as opposed to being kind of, more closed-minded and, call it, Chinese firewall or, whatever you want to call it in each respective country, I think being pretty open-minded about the need to be pretty welcome, both financial and human capital. And I think that we've seen that at the governmental level. And I think that pairs quite nicely. I mean, we got the G20 next week in Bali, so that's pretty exciting over here, where I think there may be a unique opportunity where President Xi is one of the few people in the world that's been able to, check in both with Russia's leader as well as Ukraine's leader, and also will be hosting, Biden, et cetera. So it's pretty exciting. And I have to give the government a lot of credit. And also their focus now on really building out infrastructure and this new sovereign wealth fund, getting back to government support. I think back to growing in part in Hsinchu, Taiwan, with companies like TSMC, where, more exchange coupled with obviously government support, in Hsinchu, my hometown, build out TSMC. We're certainly seeing similar dynamics with the Indonesian Investment Authority, right? Whether doing infrastructure and going the direction of doing technology companies or even technology funds and et cetera over time. So it's a governmental support, both financially and comparing a lot of notes with all the sovereign wealth funds out of Singapore, out of UAE, kind of globally. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow.
Peter, can I dial in on that with like one axis related to government that I think is very unique to Southeast Asia, or maybe not so, right? We'll see. I think Indonesia specifically with Jokowi's government, by recruiting like the founder of Gojek, like Nadiem, into becoming the Minister of Education, and then recruiting the CEO of Bukalapak, Rahmat, as a deputy coordinating minister. And there's many more unicorn founders who are being groomed into positions of being given very large governmental responsibility right now. Like they're essentially building a pipeline of unicorn tech founders to run the country. So, and this is something I've not seen at this scale in any country that we've invested in outside of Southeast Asia even. It's pretty remarkable. And when you think about that, Indonesia's unicorns have been supported by the local government, given a lot of like support in being allowed to do what they need to do, but sometimes even being given certain tasks. Like during COVID, Bukalapak, which is a portfolio company of ours, was being tasked to actually help with a lot of COVID relief because of their rural infrastructure, for example, right? So what I tell a lot of my unicorn founders is like, hey, yo, like so many people are using your service, you are actually a public service. Like whether you like it or not, at the scale of people using your services, you are a public service. You got to act like one. You got to be a good, you got to really run things right. It's a responsibility, it's a duty. So fast forward 10 years, like I wouldn't be surprised with the kind of success that Indonesia is seeing, that many more countries may adopt similar ways of working. And then you'd see public-private partnership at a whole new level. And I hope that that'll be a good thing for society broadly.
Wow, that's such a good thought in terms of, good and collaborative public and private sector sort of working together. And what I'm also hearing is that when you speak of the country and the culture, as well as the people of the region, certain terms come to mind: accessibility, this openness, which is receptivity, and I'm hearing maturity, and also the location. It's a place where things have always moved through, whether it's logistics and just people, and now it's money and innovation. So I think this spells for a lot of promise. Now, let me kind of ping that back down to, Eddie, I want to keep you online on, I saw that similar term came up in your sort of venture investment philosophy, just using the same word, sea turtle, which refers to, 20 years ago, the Chinese population taking the overseas educated Chinese and getting them to go back and sort of do something to create ventures there. And I'm seeing, I guess, the same kind of diaspora for Indonesians that are being recruited to sort of do exactly that, but also reaching great heights, as Kylie just said. Can you comment on sort of the sea turtle effect, which I think is one of your terms too?
Yeah, we certainly can talk through that. I think this is in many ecosystems. I had the privilege to be born here in Silicon Valley in the 1970s after water, food, and shelter was solved in each of Taiwan, Korea, and Israel. The United States took the large volume of students from those three specific countries. So many of our friends here at Mount Jade, a lot of the uncles I've had the privilege to partner with, had the privilege to come here in the 70s and ultimately in the 80s. Some built out, business here, but many moved back to Taiwan. Folks like Morris trying to build out, Taiwan's ecosystem. So Taiwan's ecosystem was heavily influenced, I think, by returnees called in the 80s, but call it 7 years in the ecosystem, late 80s, 90 onwards. You certainly don't necessarily need to go global to see that global exposure and get those learnings, if you will, right? Those inspirations. And I think the Chinese market I had the privilege to really cover from day one, along with some of our friends here on this call today, where, a lot of the, call it 2000 Sina, Sehu, and NetEase, who's certainly a lot of folks that studied at Dartmouth, at Stanford. 03, one of my clients, Neil Shen, that, today's founder of Sequoia China. 04, 05, the Silicon Valley Bank takes a delegation there with some of my friends on the line today. And ultimately, a lot of these guys set up shop, Sequoia China, Kleiner China Matrix, and these are all clients of mine from day one. Now, I will say by 2007, you had two camps, if you will. You had certain folks that say, hey, we all, we only want to back home local homegrown. The returnees are too spoiled. And you start seeing that spillover. Well, I'll call something out. In Indonesia, if you look, this is a pretty telling statistic. Indonesians, first off, may represent 45% of Southeast Asia's population, but no one realizes that they're the most indexed population, in the United States, for any country outside of Africa. So Indonesia, to give you some context, there's only 1,500 Indonesians per year in America. Singapore is a country of a 50th the size and has the same number of people. Taiwan's a country of 12th the size, 5x the volume of people. So to find an Indonesian America, it's almost akin to a unicorn that we pretty much have built the social graph of all the most elite university as well as corporate campus of the Indonesians. And if you look at the first 50 companies in Indonesia with a valuation of 100 million, 92% of those founding teams studied in the United States. But what I'm getting at, once again, because Kylie and these guys are pioneers here, is what I'm most excited by this ecosystem is the next generation of founders are coming out. So if you were to ask me, call it post 2022-21, many of my founders are, employee number 10 at Goto. If you look at Pinhome with Dara, right? Grew up in market, one of the best programs, was at McKinsey with Nadim, joins Goto at, employee 15, builds out, today, what is, the undisputed, leader in closed loop property, right? If you look at other companies in my portfolio, similar, people came out of C. So we are seeing that next generation of founders. So, earlier you said about, hey, what is that next trend, if you will, 10 years, or maybe in the pre-talk, we're already firsthand seeing it. Is just like every ecosystem, history is repeating himself. The next generation of founders does not need to necessarily see global to get those inspirations, and that you have the scale and you see the scale in market. And it's extremely, extremely delightful to see that.
Yeah, I think that transition is what's going to sort of fuel the continual growth of these ecosystems. But I want to turn to Bin. Vietnam is probably always known as in the region, one of the best educated workforce, from even early on. So I wanted to ask you in terms of talent recruitment in your area, right? Because essentially returnees is a very limited number. And in fact, as the ecosystem becomes more mature, the returnees value add becomes less and less. It really depends on locally groomed and local talent. What are you seeing? I mean, I see Vietnam as a place that has worked on that for a long, long time. Are you seeing local talent recruitment as something that is a real plus, or is that also a challenge just like everywhere else?
I think it's the number one challenge for not just Vietnam, but the entire region, right? And talent in general, as a limiter to growth and scale of the tech ecosystem. But that's just a function of the maturity rate, maturity of the entire region. So it's going to get there. In other words, I do think that the returnee aspect was something that was important, but becoming less so. Vietnam's the number one country in Southeast Asia that sends students to the US for school. And this is why we invested in a seed company like Apply Board and helped them start a team out here. But I do think that one of the advantages the US has is that as companies mature past Series C or D, sometimes founders find themselves, hey, this is not, a stage I enjoy. I like the earlier stages. And so investors at that point, can look at it, Fortune 500 deep bench of roster to be able to go in and bring in execs. Over here, you don't have that. You really have to develop people and develop leadership. And I think that's very, very common across the board. One of the things in terms of talent, and if I can make some generalizations here, some markets have evolved very differently from others. If you think about some of the earliest companies that were funded out here, many of them, some of the ways that investors were mitigating risk were they're looking for people with MBAs or management consulting backgrounds, very similar to Europe. And that is not like a ding or anything like that. I mean, amazing companies that come out of that. Vietnam, one of the big ways I see it's very different is that you have so many engineers just building. We have a pipeline of that's less than a year old. We have a pipeline of over 1,600 companies to make 10 investments. Many of them not investable. There's so much noise, but there's so many engineers just building products, building companies. So it's evolved slightly differently. And so we have to be mindful of this talent that's building here. What do they need? How do they develop? And how they build companies that are going to be, internationally leading at some point.
So of all the years I've spent, running around this venture startup ecosystem, when I talk to CEOs on a one-on-one basis, what's the one thing that keep you up at night, other than I need more money? for the company is always talent, talent, talent. So I think that's a consistent theme. Let me pivot a little bit more, right? I want to come back to Seimin. When we operate in this region, right? So far, it's been everything's wonderful. It's ready. It's a safe harbor. This is the best thing ever. Everybody give you money. I think that's kind of the ask here. But what are the risk factors that are different, that are perhaps unfamiliar or surprises to people who have operated outside?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. So let me just define people who have operated outside of Southeast Asia. If you could just generalize the idea of maybe like the US or Korea or Japan for that matter, there is automatically a bias of a go-to-market strategy that is pretty analogous and very congruent. If you were to launch a business in the US and at the same time you have a market of 300 million plus people to actually subsume and consume the content or services or products that you're going to sell. And so is that kind of critical mass available for a country of 50 million in Korea. So is that for 130 million of Japan. If you look at Southeast Asia specifically, I know that the marketing nomenclature is like 650, 700 million people in Southeast Asia that are able to consume and have a growing demographic. And by the way, the perfect demographic of people who consume products and services that are startup based more so. But I think a lot of founders who indeed migrate from the US to build a business here and they see the opportunity are really surprised at how fragmented and how insurmountable in many ways the go-to-market is, right? So for example, if you were just to take Indonesia, how you would enter a market in Jabodetabek and in Jakarta major is innately different in if you were to even compare it to Bali, because Bali specifically, even though it has almost this, am I right? Does it have the same population as Singapore? Like 5.4 million people, is that correct?
I don't got the specific, I suspect less, but at any rate, I mean, you have Indonesia 1, Indonesia 2, Indonesia 3, Indonesia 4. So, I mean, to argue that Southeast Asia is, homogenous, I'd say Indonesia is not homogenous. It's just like India 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. So you really got to bifurcate.
Yeah, and because of that, I think the strategies for go-to-market has changed drastically over the 4 or 5 years. I think you've heard the ideation of like city-centric expansion across the Southeast Asian markets instead of the country-specific. So those things have really changed the idea of how to actually implement business and services. I think on the whole other tier, the businesses that try to build services and products inside Southeast Asia have actually changed their expectations themselves. So if you were to build a listings, a C2C platform, maybe in 2014 and 15, you would have expected a specific amount of momentum and a GMV. Now people are out here raising $100 million on their Series A to build a just-in-time grocery delivery startup akin to an Instacart, right? So in that perspective, how you expand makes or breaks your business next month, because not only do you have to actually consider the top line growth and the promise of your company, the sunk cost in relation to that expansion has immense amounts of opportunity costs. So I think those dichotomies really have to take place and a little bit different from maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Thank you for putting some realism into all these opportunities. Now, Kylie, I think people here are ready to write their check. But here, I think that the purpose of this meeting, this webinar is also not just about thinking as a place where you can put money in and get more money out. What if, a lot of us who are interested in more actively participating, in this ecosystem, not just take the money, bring our talents, bring our networks, bring our resources. What are some of your advice for people who are here in the Valley and elsewhere on this webinar for them to actively participate, add value? How can they do that?
So I think that a lot of the alum from Monty Jade have dabbled with angel investing in the US, and some of them probably very prolific angel investors. So let me kind of focus my answer on that, right?
Well, no, but we also have people with money, but we have people with great talent. Okay, don't forget that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why angel investment is like fantastic, because the mentorship, the coaching, the networks, right? The incentives are aligned when you cut an angel check. So I'll tell a real story. Like one of the Monty Jade members, Steve Xia, right, who helped to pull this together as well. Like he's angel invested in me when I was an entrepreneur back in 2008. I was like 24 years old. I met him in Bangsar in KL, pitched him my idea, and in the afternoon he says, "Okay, I'm in. I was shocked. I'm like, wow, startup life is so easy. You know what I mean? It's it's like first angel investor I met. But of course, there's a lot of warm intros and other kind of context behind that. But without Steve's confidence and his kind of like mentorship over a span of like 6-7 years of grueling company building, like I wouldn't have lasted. You know, like he was there for me through thick and thin. So what I would say is that like a lot of the Monty Jade members who are listening in now, like the angel check can change the trajectory of someone's career, someone's life, and also like a region. And it's because of that kind of passion that Steve had infused in me. That's why I'm a VC now, right? After building and selling 2 companies, I was 30 years old. They say, hey, you want to build another company? I'm not. I'm going to help other people build companies. So I feel that that I think is my direct answer. Like find a way to co-invest, to do some angel investment, come down here. There are many ways that both like Eddie, Bin, Samian, and myself, we're happy to kind of connect the different angel groups. You know, for us, like we see some good companies, we can, knowing like what your backgrounds are, we can invite you to kind of co-invest with us. So I think that'd be my direct suggestion.
I was going to say Steve doesn't do enough due diligence, but he got really lucky on this one, huh?
Well, Steve's track record is very good. I think all of you should actually talk to Steve instead. You know what I mean?
Hey, but
don't talk to us. Talk to Steve. Like he's created an angel bridge, right? And he's kind of nailed it. So
he writes
Stay
check in 20
focused on the
minutes. What I
question.
want to
Stay
hear.
focused on the question.
Okay, hey, so let me, Bin, I want to hear that from you because you're someone who, you know, saw an opportunity. It's foreign, it's a little bit different, but it's exciting. And then you just picked up and moved out there 3 years ago. So can you give some advice to others? We have a lot of young sort of professionals who, you know, they're working in the Valley, but they're just doing another job, maybe in one of the FANG companies, but maybe in some other startup, running around. Sometimes it feels like a rat race, something new, something exciting, something where they can make a big difference. What are some of your advice to people like that?
Well, first, I want to say I'm honored to be here because there's so many original pioneering Asian American leaders here, like yourself and Steve. And so thank you for the opportunity to speak and be on here. I think for me, the big factor that got me involved with Southeast Asia, besides me and my co-founder, was just this recognition that emerging Asia historically has created so much value, but Southeast Asia, that growth, that opportunity is not just for Southeast Asians. It's for Americans, it's for East Asians, it's for Europeans. So that accessibility is really exciting to me. And you see it across a lot of different markets. I mean, that's why Singapore has gotten so much activities, because they've been very, very accessible. You know, the regulations to be able to protect IP and flexible immigration and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of countries like Vietnam are following suit. You know, they've steadily removed a lot of these foreign ownership limits across different sectors. There's not a lot of gatekeeping that happens here. So you see a lot of market leading companies like Shopee and Lazada and Grab and Gojek and, you know, Facebook and Google. I mean, it's just so accessible, at least for me as someone who's an American, to be able to come in and participate. And coming out here, you know, 70% of the population is under 35 in Vietnam, and everyone is so hopeful and positive and optimistic that they think next year they're going to be a millionaire. So and they're very, very friendly about it, very open about it. So that is just very inspirational to be around. And for me, yeah, and this is not just in Vietnam, but across the market. You feel that synergy, you see the quarterly changes that are happening here, and you can't help but be invigorated and energized around that. And then you step back and you start realizing, you know, there are still so many problems to solve here. That adoption for technology is still very early. You see so many sectors where a lot of these companies, the market leading companies, are just running very, very inefficiently. You know, the organizations that they built. You think about like a software, an engineering driven company being able to take that top spot over the next 5 years. So
well,
that's
I heard from Kylie that you have an angel money, be an advisor, be a value added investor. We have 4 people who's got plenty of deals to share. So that's one. I'm hearing from Bin, I mean, actually from your experience, spend some time out there. A lot of you have sabbaticals, vacations. Go and call up one of these guys and say, hey, can I add some value to one of your portfolios? But you got to make that pitch really good. So work on your pitch, maybe you'll get an opportunity to get to know the area. And when you feel the excitement, perhaps jump in. That's some of my takeaway on that. But let me turn that over to Eddie. Now, Eddie, you are, you've done so much. You are making so much money in the U.S. Banker, you're a Morrison Forrester lawyer, and then you did all the big hits. Palantir, Affirm, PayPal. You should be retired, but somehow you found Indonesia. Now, how does an American young professional who's doing great, just making money here, kind of think about Indonesia?
Yeah, well, on my end, really, it's a tale of serendipity. I mean, our firm name is Integrity, Sincerity, and Appreciation for Serendipity. And frankly, this all came about in that I'd heard about the market in the 2000s when I was based in Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong, covering a lot of my clients that started looking at Southeast Asia for the first time, like a Goldman Sachs, where my partner Patrick set up their operations and market. But frankly, I didn't move on it. Back then, I think there was 7-8 million people on the internet. Today, it's 220 million people, right? So in the 2014 or 15, when I was a founder and CEO and I was transitioning out of my company, it was really serendipity that brought me to Indonesia. That my best friend in Hong Kong said, "Hey, you really should talk to my college roommate. He's transitioning out of Goldman Sachs, running a little bit of money, on his own balance sheet and this." And so in light of that, we just had a unique opportunity to, dabble a little bit in the market and, just seeing, these, the Kylies, the Bins, these guys were all at it, same all we're at it, and, they paved the way, and we happened to be at the right place at the right time. I mean, I never envisioned this would play out this way, but what I did think was that we had a very unique opportunity to build the first Indonesian homegrown firm that also has a presence here in Silicon Valley. Today, we've yet to meet another firm at least structured that way. And I think that's what's allowed us to really win in this market, is that we act as the Indonesia beachhead strategy, if you will, for Silicon Valley, for North Asia, et cetera. And then we pair that with the best in-country distribution. So I think that, that's how. It's not that I had any foresight or whatever, but it was just similar dynamics that I certainly saw. I had the privilege to see growing up in each of Taiwan, saw, Korea, Israel ecosystem. Certainly I covered Chinese ecosystem from day one. And it was just history repeating itself, and kind of jumped on into it and thought that we could come up with something super differentiated, in that, we came out and said that, Southeast Asia is a fallacy, at least at the early stage. And I think that we took a very different view, single country strategy. Ran an independent firm in a market dominated by 50 to 100 conglomerates. We brought in 35 of the top 50 to 100, then decided to run a super concentrated portfolio. I mean, in 6 years, we've done a total of 26 investments. I know peers of mine that did 25 investments last quarter across 8 countries. Yeah.
In any case, it's a lot to do, whether it's a bigger portfolio or a very concentrated portfolio. Let me, this is so exciting, but at the same time, we've been going serially. Let me do something in parallel. I'm going to switch the tempo a little bit. I'm going to give you, all you amazing investors, just quick categories. Like, I'll give you a category to invest in. Can I see a thumbs up or thumbs down all at the same time, right? So this is what I call lightning round. So first category, a good AI team with experience has good AI engine, so we can apply it to anywhere. Come on, give me a thumbs down, thumbs up. I got neutral, I got a thumbs down, I got a thumbs up. Eddie, come on, commit.
I'm not a trend-based investor, a sector-based investor. We build all our models bottoms up.
So that's a no. I can't comment. All right. Crypto as a sector. If you saw a deal, would you say yes or no? I mean, if it's the right deal, the right people.
Well, if it's infra related, yes.
Okay, good qualification. Everybody wants to know about metaverse. Don't worry, I won't share the results with your LPs. Come on, Eddie. Come on, Ben. Metaverse deal for Vietnam.
It's pretty on consensus right now. So I think with the right team, if I could be patient with it, I would support it maybe.
The thing is, I've done, but then I've started to learn a little bit more. Like it's a bit longer. I mean, I appreciate the format you have, but these are very nuanced answers. It's not a, you know what I mean? It's so hard.
It's just for fun, guys. Play with me a little bit.
It's challenging.
I can do like a wobbly hand, you know what I mean, for every answer.
We have a heavily invested sector in the US called autonomous driving. If they had something that's going to be an operator in your region, would you go for it?
Yes.
Okay, I need to see visuals, please. We're almost done.
I care about the data sets which support it, you know what I mean? So not as much, you know what I mean? There's like a whole tech stack to autonomous driving, right? So there are specific layers of that stack that I'm very interested in.
Just keeping it very general, simple for the broad audience. Agritech. Eddie has no opinion. Okay, that's fair. Very, very broad. So generally speaking, give me your right hand if you're more of a consumer, left hand if you're B2B, or you can give me both hands.
We're 50-50 in our portfolio.
So Ben, that's a left hand is a consumer, right?
No, this is my left hand
B2B.
here, but okay.
Okay, B2B for Ben.
Images are switched.
Eddie, do you
B2B.
care for B2B or consumer?
Yeah, they're left hand.
Exclusively back B2B for early stage. Yeah, pretty much exclusively B2B early stage.
Exclusive B2B. Good to hear. Okay, very good. And just a quick commentary. Is there a lot more to come out of shared economy?
I believe yes, if the approach is done differently. Oh, sorry, just this.
Shared economy, Eddie. Man, Eddie, you think too hard. I want a gut instinct. Now, Min, I love the way you answered it. Go ahead and say what might be the difference, because you have some reservation for a generic shared economy proposition.
No, because I'm actually one of the biggest benefactors in many ways, mini casualty of shared economy. Like I did the Series B for Lyft, I did Goto, and it's been really interesting. Like if you were to ask me, would I build a sharing economy, essentially a terraforming investment thesis in 2022 as compared to 2020, 2016, 2017 when I did those investments? I think the answer would be a resounding no, specifically because the economics of getting to a sustainable place has changed drastically because of what's going on in the markets. So in that perspective, I think there's a lot more benefit for building out a sharing economy approach that is much less energy intensive and is much more slower in pace. I think what India is doing with their sovereign protocols is in many ways a sharing economy, because the most core utility is actually given out for such a low price for almost free. So in the aspect of a sovereign protocol or an open source strategy towards developing those models of sharing, I think those are where we actually can gain really big wins for all sides of the table.
Thank you for sharing that.
Peter, quick comment about to tie a few of your questions together. Early on, you asked about for the Monty Jade folks who are attending here right now, how can they get engaged in Southeast Asia? What are some advice? And then here we're talking about sectors. My advice is there's so many false positives by thinking via sectors. Like let's say, for example, you're excited about fintech. Do you know how many really crappy fintech business models exist? You know, there's only a handful of them have great unit economics, and then each of them have their nuances on how they kind of develop and how much returns you get from them, right? So at 500, like I educate all my VCs. I'm like, yo, look at business models, and that's essentially what a lot Seaman has been talking about, right? Look, what is this business model exploiting? It doesn't matter. Like, look, let's say eFishery. Are they fintech or are they ad tech? Like they got $300 million, 11% EBITDA in the past 12 months. They're not US. They are like homegrown talent, for example, and that's a bit of an exception right now, at least, right? But you know, all you need is an exception in your portfolio. We're playing the game of outliers and exceptions. We're not playing the game of generalities. So a lot of folks who are entering angel investing or VC, you know, of course we're trained, we've grown up with generalities and macros, and all these things are very important. But at the end of the day, you need to understand the patterns of exceptions. You're playing a game of exceptions. The general rule, the averages should not apply to you if you win. So with that in mind, look for the business models and exploit these business models. And I'll close off with an example of a sharing economy, right? For years, I've passed on this type of business model where you can like borrow a lawnmower from your neighbor or something, or you got this like DSLR camera you don't want to buy, you just borrow off this platform. You know, I've passed on that. You know, a lot of people have passed on that. Recently, where we've been studying 2022 unicorns, right? 200 new unicorns like came to birth only in 2022 alone, and we're done of the year. 2 of them are these borrower like a lawnmower companies, and they're all in Europe. So I'm like, what? And it's all like I'm dialing in. There's one in France, there's one in Germany. I'm like, what's going on there, right? What can I learn from this? So again, like, so I want to string it all together back to sharing economy or whether these broad sectors. Like, investigate the business models within these sectors, and don't get too swayed by the sector generalities alone. Like, VC is a game of exceptions.
I really appreciate that, because you know, I think I've spoken to a couple of you offline, is that one of my takeaway, having been in the industry a little bit, is from one of my favorite professors, Bill Solomon, where he said, where everybody rushes to, especially all my classmates, that's when you just hide and run away as far as you can. So that's kind of a trend investment where everybody goes, and the macro, the trend. So, but I agree with you. I mean, the trend is one way for people to find out if they have any value add. Do they understand? Can they interpret the business model? But I agree with you 100%. You have to go inside whatever macro, whatever trend, and find that outlier, someone who's differentiated, who has extracted value that no one else can. But no one else means that they don't just have more money, they don't have more this and that, because those money, we know now, unfortunately, but good for you guys, money is a commodity. It's more than that, right? So thank you for highlighting that. I want to go back to, you guys did give me the latitude to say I can ask anything. So one tough question today, I think it's tough, but it's a good one. Who wants to go first on one lesson you learned early in your career, either as an investor or operator, that you will never repeat, or that has turned into one of your key drivers for success in driving your companies today? Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, so if I were to look back, having been a founder, not a very good one, I think, is that the trend is ultimately absolutely not your friend at early stage. And I think back to, when I launched a smart home company, I guess it would have been in 2013, the trend was your friend, right? You had Nest, Labs, et cetera. So I think in those environments, you generally, money's pretty plentiful. So as an investor, now as a founder, also challenge you, as an investor, you just maybe, people don't necessarily have the right why, right? The founder market fit sometimes isn't there. People read about it, it's popular. So sometimes you attract the wrong founders. I mean, I think if I launched a soy sauce business, I'd be more successful because I'm religious about soy sauce, but saving homes from fires, it's great. It saved my own home from fires. So I think that's great. But do I eat, live, sleep? Absolutely not, right? So I think my business could have been a lot more successful with that. So first off, you get a lot of fake founders, I would say. Secondly, you get a lot of non-independent VCs. So everyone's chasing the tape. Every play, because your LP says, hey, what's your play in this space, right? So that's very bad. Thirdly, employees, you just can't retain them for the life of you. The next day they read about in the newspaper, recent graduates, like they'll leave you the next day for who pays you better, right? And just like your business school example, right? So very bad as well. And then fourthly, customer acquisition. Once you get the money, everyone's subsidizing, right? How do you justify as a founder to win? So those are like the four ultimate no's of venture investing. So I think I haven't gone through that personally, and I'm pretty public about that. Personally as a founder, looking back at it, that's one thing I promised myself as a fund that we would really avoid. And I think that we've, for the most part, been able to avoid that like the plague. Not to say like when we first, started, there wasn't a couple, one or two that maybe I look back at, maybe it was the right decision at the time for some other reasons, but the trend is absolutely not your friend. And I think at early stage investing, I'd argue that, at least at our firm, we really pride ourselves in investing in uninvestable assets. I mean, if you look at our cryptocurrency exchange, which is, not the number one player in Indonesia, people are like, oh, Eddie, you invest in crypto. I was like, no, I found the founder at Bitcoin 6,000. His co-founder left him over the course of 6 months, and Bitcoin was 3,000. We got behind it, and then we brought it out to Pantera, to Lightspeed, and just raised another $100 million 3 months ago. And so, honestly speaking, in that case, we got the best entry price. We were able to tease out the fake founders. We were able to, you can't go to Goto work on crypto, and then on subsidies, we don't have to deal with that. It's a very, high margin EBITDA positive business. So that was the ultimate lesson. I learned it really the hard way, and then I guess my investors alongside it learned it the hard way as well.
Well, we learn, we get better. Other gems from the other three very seasoned investors?
I'll dive into something easy and quick. So price sensitivity, like entry valuation, because I'm also saying this in the context that maybe some angel investors over here, right? But I've passed on a lot of companies, like my team and I, we've passed on a lot of companies in the past like 1.5, 2 years, because during COVID, for some reason, everyone's excited about public markets, but the seed founders, the valuations went crazy. So we went pretty quiet because we just like been a bit more religious about passing on stupid valuations, especially in the early stage. And people are, hey, Kylie, I found you seem so quiet, have you been active and everything? Oh, no. I'm like, now that, people have normalized themselves, the very same companies coming back and say, hey, we're extending the same round, you know what I mean? At the last round's valuation and all that. So we're like, okay. So like we're more active than we ever been right now. We intend to make another 30 more investments in the next 2 quarters because now the prices are starting to be more sensible again. Right now, why is this a mistake? Is because when I look back on like the performance of my first fund, I'm saying that, there are like all these big names, but like a lot of the returns came from a few of those names, and some of those names aren't even the big names. It's because the entry valuation was low enough that the exit valuation, you get like 170x, you get like 300x on the investment because of the entry valuation. So for a lot of angels, I've seen a lot of activity in Singapore. The angels are paying too high of a price. Don't get ripped off, right? Be okay to pass based on price.
Because dilution is coming. Okay, same in
and you may miss one or two great deals. Like granted, so maybe don't take that advice too with a grain of salt. You may miss some good deals, but then again, if you stayed with that money in that good deal, 8 years later you've made like okay money.
Yeah,
not crazy money, right?
Thank you for that.
I think on my sorry, go ahead then.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, one learning lesson or wrong assumption I made was what venture capital was going to be like. You know, I thought I would be living a life of solitude, meeting founders, meeting LPs, and running my own firm and building my own firm. Now, yeah, it's very much like building my last startup. Culture matters, right? No matter, even if you're paying attention or not, your culture gets baked in the first couple of years. So being very intentional about it is really enjoyable and extremely important for all organizations globally. And so being able to enjoy venture capital in a very, very entrepreneurial way has been really rewarding. And so this is one assumption I made incorrectly, and then realizing that, hey, this is a chance to be able to kind of build a culture, and then helping our companies really focus on building culture as well, I think is really, really important.
That's the kind of mistake that's good. Same in. Let's go to you.
Yeah. I think for me, when I was starting out in 2013, literally founding and building Rakuten Ventures from the ground up, I also had similar kind of biases as Ben does, in the perspective that, like you get the idea that you will be the eternal cheerleader of the founder and management team, right? It'll be a very unilateral relationship where you'll just cheer them on through the hard times and the good times. But in the past, almost 10 years now, I've just learned that it's good to be a cheerleader, but you have to parallel being in many ways a consummate activist investor. When I say activist investor in the public equity sense, it's about not only defending your founder's choices from the other board members if you believe so, but also being able to say, I don't think this is the right choice. I agree with you on the 3 points, but on the 5 points that you talked about, I think these are the bad mistakes. Being able to kind of naturalize the courage to do so with the founder groups, and also being able to basically push back on the board members who, again, hypothetically, you want to always be good friends with and drink too much with, right? But it doesn't work that way, especially when you get into growth equity companies, and these companies are actually looking straight down on the barrel of a IPO or liquidity event. You have to specifically think about what you believe and how you can advise so. So there's this company that you all know that is very big. They're trying to go IPO, and they specifically drew their path towards a different liquidity event, which turned out to be very good. But at the same time, if I didn't, I do believe that it would have been a lost alpha. So trying to be consistent with what you believe in and trying to impart that to the founders. And I think maybe to that extent, I think what Monty J can give, your network can give, especially at the learned stage of the executives who have retired or who are in the path of being able to more mentor their companies. I think that mentorship network can go a really long way to Southeast Asian founders if there is a program to do so, because these trials and tribulations, they're not so different from the trials and tribulations that very, very experienced veterans would have experienced in the US and whatnot.
That's so good to hear. We'll definitely take that to heart. What we do is actually pretty unique. We have a pretty reasonable history, a lot of feedback from a lot of people all around that says what we provide is actually a lot of value in a very unique way. Love to talk to you guys further about expanding that. I think we can do a lot together for the good of everyone. Now, if you thought my questions were hard, I'm going to open it up to, I'm going to ask Steve for help. And he's been answering some of the questions, but he's sort of saved 2 or 3 of the best to share with you guys.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I'm just looking at the Q&A. There's some really good, interesting questions. I'm just going to take this one from Christina. So I think Bing has already answered your point of view. So can you all, I take it you can all see the question, right? Peter, are you able to see it? I can't hear you.
Steve, it'd be a lot
Okay.
easier if you read it out. Switching screens
All right.
hard. Why don't you read it?
Okay, sounds good. This is Christina from JP Morgan, San Francisco. Singapore successfully created a friendly environment for startups 10 years ago. Based on my understanding, startups from Southeast Asia used to come to Silicon Valley to raise funds. A US company would go to Southeast Asia to buy startups. So the Southeast Asia startups scale fast now, while more capital flows in. What do you think the capital, talented people, and technology from Southeast Asia could benefit from Silicon Valley and vice versa? I think this is a relevant question for this panel. Let's take it around with panelists. Simi, you want to give that a try first? I think you can see the question too.
Yeah, I think generally, if you look at what can we benefit from the US, I will never discount US liquidity and US access to capital. I think that's the most important thing, even at the pre-public stage. But at the same time, especially for the products or services that a Southeast Asian company would build out, it's very reasonable for that product to be semi-domesticated or localized for the US market and launched. And I think even having a muted or medium level of success will bring a lot of confidence and a lot of traction back to the company to further succeed in the markets. I think Ben, you already mentioned this about the US listings. Definitely, when you're in the US market, being able to follow the trend, being able to be at the epicenter of financial speculation and trading in longs, that can never be discounted. If you look at pre-pandemic or in the middle of pandemic, how much, for example, an SEA group benefited from people's ideation towards the benefit and the, I guess, Alibaba moment of Southeast Asia, how much that grew the market cap and their trust in SEA group, I think that can never be discounted. So definitely, I think those 3 or 4 aspects are really important and core here.
There's like the most obvious opportunity. Oh, sorry, if I may. The most obvious opportunity to what the US can provide is that if Southeast Asian founders are building a global business, and that mostly is enterprise SaaS, any kind of B2B model that's globally focused, it doesn't matter where the company starts and begins. Like, it'll eventually get on the NYSE in some way, and it needs the support of a lot of American investors. Like when we backed Solana back then, the founder is like building it out in Russia. When we backed GitLab, the founder is building it out in Ukraine. When we backed Talktest, the founder is in Portugal. But eventually, they're all American companies, and they're all worth like double-digit billions. Like Talktest is 10 billion, and so on and so forth, and they're serving the world. So over here in Southeast Asia, we found a company called Lottie Fowls. It's built by someone from the Maldives, right? He didn't come here to dive or whatnot, right? He's building a company in Malaysia, right? And so this dude, like, he builds like the Canva for like fowl animation, right? And so and then we introduced them straight to US investors, right? They got backing from Microsoft and so on and so forth. They're worth $500 million right now. So again, like, I'm telling these stories because like these are the like, you have to go beyond like national thinking almost, especially if you're building a global business, and that's where the US can really help.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, Eddie, any perspective, since you know the 2 areas really well?
Yeah, sure. So, at least, at our firm, one thing we pride ourselves getting back to being the only Indonesian homegrown firm, with also a concurrent presence here in Silicon Valley, where I spend the majority of my time, is really it is the human capital and the financial capital. So I spend 6 months a year, on university and corporate campuses with talent. So that's one piece, although I do acknowledge that on a go-forward basis, I'm super excited by in-country talent as well. So we also have a local program called the Bumi program. Our US program is what we call the Volcom Southeast Asia Turtle program, about, really, guiding folks from Indonesia on their path home. So I think human capital is one piece, as well as a lot of founders. So today we have a lot of the top founders of the top companies in the United States invest in our firm, as well as from China. And so certainly a lot of those folks offer a lot of unique insights to, folks like in our portfolio, let's say building out, Zendit, which could be called a Stripe, could be called a Shopify, whatever you want to call it, pretty full stack, or like an Ondalin, which is, kind of like a Flexport, if you will, of, called Southeast Asia. So I think founders, and of course, financial capital, where today we do have 35 of the top funds in the world, or their founding partners invest in us to enter the Indonesian market, where the United States is our large source of capital. Where at Intudo, we generally write $1 to $25 million tickets, but on the back end is really just, all of our major global partners that have written checks in our accounts, whether it be the Panteras, the Lightspeeds, the Cotus, the Tigers, et cetera. And I think really a lot of those folks, maybe, they don't necessarily, some folks might not necessarily know Indonesia inside out or Singapore, Southeast Asia, but at least they can share a lot of the learnings having invested in similar businesses across multiple geographies.
Great, excellent. Bing, I'm gonna ask you to go again. I don't think everybody can read your writing there. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I think the holy grail for Southeast Asia unicorns is being able to access liquidity that of a New York IPO. But going beyond that, I mean, last year we saw Excel, Andreessen, Altos make their first investment in Vietnam. And so there's something that investors are looking at. They're looking at scale. They're looking at ways to add differentiated VC assets over here. And the opportunity over here that connects to Vietnam too, we are seeing companies like, Misfit Wearables, for example. Their entire software team is in Vietnam. You look at a company like Anduin Technologies, who's their fintech product focused on the U.S. market. Their entire software team's in Vietnam. And so you have a lot of these different examples where teams in Vietnam are actually already serving the U.S. market. One of our company's virtual internships, backed by Sequoia, just closed their Series A. Their revenue comes from the U.S. but their teams here. And so there's already a lot of this connective tissue between this market as well as the U.S. And we're going to see more of that coming.
Got it. Great. I'm gonna get to another question. This is from Tony Huang, or Uncle Tony. I'm gonna actually twist this a little bit because I think this is just beyond just related to Taiwan. So the question is, Southeast Asia is very hot, and Taiwan has been trying to tap into that region's market through its new southbound policy by the government, but with very limited success. They've been trying to do this for the past 10 years. And I think it's more than just Taiwan. It could be Japan. It could be China as well. It could be Korea. So what mistakes do you see these North Asian tech companies, whether it's funds or startup, coming down to Southeast Asia? They have not been all that successful. So what can they do differently? And Tony's question is related to Taiwan, but I think it's beyond, I would say, just the North Asia. And especially last 2 years, the Chinese company and founders and funds are all coming very aggressively. Can you share your view on that? Eddie, you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So, specific to Taiwan, I can talk to North Asia as well. So Taiwan, we are privileged to have the majority of the top 10 conglomerates by equity market cap invest in our firm. Really, as part of, President Tsai has the called public sector new southbound policy. We've kind of positioned ours as the private sector, where every single independent VC in Taiwan is also investing in our fund for the most part. So, I would say that, I think to that end, the way we partner with a lot of these folks is that, often we'll take the early stage risk, and we've seen them come alongside us. In some cases, we'll take the board, we already are on the board, so we know the business pretty inside out. So I think that model has kind of at least worked in our minds. And obviously a lot of these firms on top of that, we can make them X. Now, even if we made them 10X, it wouldn't change their lifestyle, but more so, they have major strategic initiatives, whether it be building JVs in market and this. And so at least that model has seemed to work for Taiwan with us. On the Korea side, we've certainly taken a similar approach, but I have found that, the ones that have not been as successful are folks that sometimes go in on their own and often, don't necessarily localize adequately and send down, let's say a Chinese company or send down a Chinese national, just, the CEO keeps changing and it continues being a Chinese national. I think there's often a gross underappreciation for, the need to localize, particularly from North Asia coming down to Southeast Asia. Maybe it could be an owner mentality or whatever maybe. And if I were to think about this, I look to, it's really, really a consistent theme. You look at the VC firms overwhelmingly that are coming in from China, really haven't really localized. You look at everyone on the team, predominantly, it's still Chinese people, you know what I mean? And I'd argue even in Southeast Asia as a region, you find that, it's kind of astonishing in my mind that you find that people are deploying, let's say, in the Asian market. It'd be like back me without my co-founder, Patrick, that'd be just completely irresponsible. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you would never back a manager in China without like a Chinese speaking GP, nor in India or in the US. But for some unbeknownst reason that happens in Southeast Asia, I get it at growth where there's like spreadsheets, but for early stage, I'm extremely skeptical. So the common thread is just, I think that inadequate localization, underappreciation, and the owner mentality. And we just see it, the same thing happen over and over, whether it be in the context of startups or in the context of funds. And it's just, and maybe it's a lack of trust for, and so you just don't see, and hopefully it changes over time. We get asked that every day, whether from China, from North Asia. And I do think that, if you can partner with the right, managers, like many of the folks on this, on the call today, then I think you can get some pretty unique insights and, people are pretty committed.
Great. Yeah, maybe we should really educate that the Chinese companies coming down. I continue to see that mistakes in a very large scale. Kylie, any perspective? Taiwanese, Korean, Japanese, or Chinese company coming to Southeast Asia? What can they do differently?
Similar to Eddie, I think we've been beneficiaries of some of these southbound policies. Like we don't really need to kind of like we don't need to sell them on Southeast Asia because the Japanese have been investing in Southeast Asia for many decades in different industries. And so in the first wave of LP money, non-US LP money that we got, a lot came from Japan. And then it became Korea. And then we had this season of Taiwan, right, during the southbound policy. So but my comment is that like it's hard to say that like there's not much success. Because when it comes to venture, number one, it takes time for successes to happen. Like I didn't even know if I was a good VC or not until like 2 years ago, because none of my companies were public. Like not, you know what I mean? It's so hard to say, right? You got to be in the game for long enough. So I think that a lot of the money that's coming from Taiwan or these other places, like we need to give it time to bake. It's kind of unfair to kind of call them out too soon, right? Because these kind of things, good things take time. But number two is that even if they have succeeded from a LP standpoint, they're not going to chest thump to say, yeah, we're so successful, we backed all these funds, right? Like this is not their nature to chest thump. So maybe the failure then is like they don't chest thump enough, right? Like I don't know, right? But then if you talk about like direct companies, like then I think what Eddie's comments are very right. I think maybe Sammy can talk a bit about Rakuten's challenges with sometimes what it tried to do in Southeast Asia as well. But like being local and being hyper local is like so important. Like I remember Grab's founders, they moved to Indonesia just to be able to crack Indonesia and fight Gojek. Like myself and my wife, we moved to Indonesia and lived there for more than 4 years. You know, just really, you got to be on ground, you got to be local. And I think those things are just like the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think one thing, and Kylie just really made a good comment and a good segue to this is, Rakuten itself has really, really interesting ideas of market expansion, but also fantastic failures at the same time. Like if you remember back in 2013 to 16, Rakuten as an e-commerce platform had 4 or 5 market and offices and operations for its core e-commerce services in and around Southeast Asia. So they did in the US, so they did in Europe. One of the biggest things and one of the biggest mistakes now looking back is indeed neither the respect for what worked in those markets and the readiness of the markets, but also the respect for the original business model, because Rakuten's core is B2B2C, trying to make sure that we can build a lot of mini merchants and build that into a platform that becomes a concentric circle and very, very salubrious. For example, we took buy.com, one of the best URLs in the US, and we changed it into Rakuten.com. We directed everything to Rakuten.com, and we changed the fundamental relationship, the physics of the relationship with the merchants. These were very large mistakes that we saw, and we've actually fixed a lot of those mistakes by simply focusing on what business model works best for those companies at the time being. If you look at, what kind of capital or what kind of companies succeed in Southeast Asia that comes from North Asia or whatnot, I think it's still far and few.
Bing, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I guess when it comes to North Asia, yeah, we've had our funds be backed by corporates out of Korea, corporates out of Taiwan and Hong Kong. I think the secret to success is having a balance of local teams and diverse teams. People who are respectful and love the markets they're operating in. And I think that's kind of the bare minimum, right? You have to love and respect the market you're trying to compete in. And so if you're coming in it with just a very single-faceted team, you might be introducing risk and success there.
All right, thank you. Peter, our time is almost over, and there are a few more questions. So the panelists, if you can get to the Q&A, help us answer some of them. Peter, are you there? Yep.
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm going to pass it back to you. It's noisy.
Yeah, let me pass it on to you, because I think there's still one kind of let's start wrapping up. Let's take the questions maybe sometime at the very, very end. I have one, this has been both mind-opening, educational, and just kind of takes away the layers of, I would call it, even for me, misconceptions of things that I didn't realize were really so dynamic, so rapid, the speed and the maturity, and mainly I think the openness, right? A lot of readiness to do great things. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to, open your minds too and make 3 predictions on what you see in your market where you're operating in the next 10 years. Think big, think broad. I'll even put the question out there is that, are there things that are more, call it ecosystem-wise, culturally, that are going to be led by this region to show the world there's a better way? So this is your time to be visionaries. And because you play a big part in both supporting, but I think leading this ecosystem. Where do you see that could go in 10 years?
Maybe I could start here. Yeah, I think in 10 years is a very, very long time. If you look back just 10 years ago, you envision the world, like there has so much has happened, and we're talking about entire ecosystems here. So for me, Southeast Asia is the beneficiary of being able to look at China and India and leapfrog and be able to go and say, hey, what business models were working not 5 years ago, but what business models are working from last quarter. And so this ability to leapfrog in this region that has so much accessibility, we're going to see an incredible amount of progress over the next 5 to 10 years. And so being part of that, it's really hard to predict because, my brain doesn't work that way. Just as hard as it would be for someone to predict today from 10 years ago. So the only thing I can say is that it is maturing faster than most people expect. And I have, great hope that this region, I think Kylie thinks it's emerged, but I think it's still emerging. I think there's still lots of opportunities and lots of maturity in many different sectors. And we're going to see a very, very different place here with many globally leading companies coming out of this region.
Thank you, Ben.
If I were to take a stab at this, I think 10 years is a little bit too. I have no idea what's going to happen 10 years. I'm not sure what I'm having for lunch after this call, so it's a little bit hard to.
It's a lot of lunches and dinner later.
Indeed, but if you I always lean forward on what's predictable, and for me, what's predictable generally are the macroeconomics, and they work backward from there. If you look at what's happening with the US, with the Fed, with the central banks around the world, with the number 2, number 3 currencies, and generally the trade kind of imbalances that are happening, it is 100% deterministic that there will be much more capital driven into markets like Southeast Asia. And the markets that look like Southeast Asia are markets like Latin America, places like Sub-Saharan Africa. When that happens, that's going to start to wind essentially a gear that turns a little bit more faster and with a lot more momentum, which will also draw a lot more talent and resources that are non-monetary to the region very, very quickly. And when I think about that, and when I know that that's going to happen, I think about, as Ben talked about, what does the next leapfrog of consumption on the enterprise side and the consumer side look like? And I think about those, and then again, I work backwards towards companies that can support those things. So even in Indonesia, you're seeing that happen. Why are neobanks in all of developed markets struggling like there's no tomorrow? They'll spend $5 to get $3 of deposits in, and there's no end to it. And on the other side of the table, why is Nubank in Latin America carrying 80 million customers, including 3 regions, while places like Indonesia, Jago Bank is having such a field day with deposits? It's because there are specific barriers that are not existent in those markets. Now they can actually pull the lever and acquire customers at a much more effective rate. I think those parallels will consistently get faster and faster, especially now we see in many ways an economic reset is in its precipice of things.
Wow, thank you, Simon. Let me jump to Eddie.
Sure, thanks, Peter. So yeah, 10 years is everyone's already said this. I mean, you got to understand, 10 years is longer than the average marriage in most countries. In the United States and Taiwan, where I grew up, in each case, it's 7 years. In the case, that's why I tell every LP that, we take money with, or every company I back, you got to, you can't, once it's a financial relationship, it's not like a divorce. You can just like walk away from it. But at any rate, I think some things that I think are, things that we're already seeing. I mean, I already talked about from a talent perspective, we're already into the ecosystem. So I think it's no question that, more and more, local founders, which I think is spectacular. We're seeing that firsthand in our, Fund 3 right now. Secondly, I think that thanks to the local heroes, the Nadims, the Anthony Chance, certainly maybe a lot less reverse brain drain. It's already improved, but even more markedly, when we first started our firm, call it 1 in 3 of our deals were sourced in the United States. But when I was on these university and corporate campuses every other week, a lot of folks still want to stay in the United States, but increasingly I'm finding folks a lot more amenable to going back in market. So I think that's really exciting. So I think that covers talent. On the government side, certainly, I think that, the government, policies, whether it be Indonesia, Vietnam, et cetera. And I think Kylie made a great point earlier, on the minister part, that's definitely a case as well. We're seeing that firsthand. So I think that is pushing. So government, even more so, we got G20 here putting, Indonesia, Southeast Asia on world stage. I think it's excellent. On the private sector, one point I wanted to talk about earlier, for the ecosystem to survive, Indonesia, call it 50 to 100, diversified conglomerates influence, the market in large part. I would say when we started in 2017, the technology weighting on the local stock exchange was 0%. I would say today, thanks to certain companies that many of the guys on this thing have backed, whether it be Goto or Bukalapak, maybe we're around 10%. So it really is second, third generation owners that are tasked by their mom, dad, aunt, or uncle previously with adopting, a tech was a nice to have for their family-owned bank, retail, real estate, et cetera. During the pandemic, it became a must-have. So I think that, the private sector really, and going away from the term of disrupting, but really more our companies, given that we almost exclusively focus on B2B on early stage, is really partnering with these conglomerates rather than disrupting them. So I think the private sector, these people now are CEO, or in 10 years, they will be CEO if they're not already, from their mom, dad, aunt, or uncle. And I think that applies to Philippines and other markets that are conglomerate driven. And then the last piece is just the capital stack. I think that already has been in large part where from a commodity perspective. So I think these are all things pointing to an ecosystem that is heading the direction of maturity. But certainly for Indonesia, I think that, just on the talent side, every day gets better, but we just got to be patient with it.
Wow, that's sort of a big spoonful, a lot to digest there. Before we go to Kylie, hey Kylie, so please do try and stay with the pack and give us some insights. If it's 2 years, 10 years too long, go 9, 8, 7, whatever you can give. But I also, I love the way that you talked about, because you're a community builder. You've always built online communities, and you're also talking about major shifts in terms of sort of this global fabric that is being weaved together, whether it's SaaS or mobile, right? So maybe on top of the challenge of 3 predictions, which it's not, as if that's not big enough, any sort of insight from you on what kind of world this could become with the kind of leadership that's being put into place. Leadership doesn't mean just leaders, but in terms of the leadership actions that are happening in your society, that could be a role model for all of us. Wow,
it's a big ask. Okay, let's see what I can do. So first off, on predictions for the next 10 years, like there are some facts, and I alluded to them, foreshadowed it a bit earlier. There's going to be 4 billion more internet users in the next 10 years, just fact, right? How many of them are smartphone users? Not so sure, probably half of them. I would say close to fact, right? And if not 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, but you know what? I think it's going to be sooner. So with that many new internet users, it is very, very easy to underestimate the future. Why? Every new internet user that comes on board, it's not like a linear way that the economy expands, right? These people are going to learn stuff, they're going to do stuff, they want to buy, they want to, So there's a Moore's law to technology, but there's also a Moore's law to consumers jumping on internet smartphones as well. So then our next question is that, okay, well, if there's 4 billion more internet users, like where are they going to be? Well, most of the cities are already covered in the internet. So the next 4 billion internet users are not going to be in cities. They're going to either be moving to cities new, or they're going to be like I think what Eddie talked about, Indonesia 2, 3, 4, they're going to be tier 2, 3, 4 cities, 5 cities, right? Then our next question is, what business models leapfrog and just like wire up all of these folks? So I'll give some real examples. Like when Bukalapak in Indonesia was going head to head with Tokopedia are winners in the cities. Talk to anyone in the city, they're buying stuff on Tokopedia, right? But you talk to anyone in a rural area, they prefer to buy and shop on Bukalapak. Then they double down on that strength, and they kind of launched out 18 million small Mitra stores right now. They wired up the rest of Indonesia of all these small stores, right? So they won on offline rural business models. Then again, earlier on, I talked about e-fishery. Who in what world would like an American founder want to like built for rural fish farmers in Indonesia, understanding their pains, right? Helping them with like IoT, computer vision, fish feeding, and then helping them sell that fish to the market, selling fish futures. In what world would you create that? In fact, we run our obvious unicorn analysis, is what we call it internally, on all the unicorns like every quarter. And we see that the only comparable to that is this one company in China called Nixon that like helps with farm tech for pigs and then helps to sell the pigs in the market. So these kind of like rural first business models is big business, big, huge, right? And it takes very local nuance and knowledge to unlock these. And it is that big that I mentioned, just to give some numbers to it again, eFishery, $300 million US in revenues last 12 months, 11% EBITDA. That is big. They've been growing 3 digits year on year. Now they're launching in India because India doesn't even have this. So my dream is that if we can build in the next 10 years, local first entrepreneurs who are building for the rest of the 4 billion, that would be beautiful. And it's going to be big business. So these days when a founder comes to me and says, oh, you got this thing, is going to like deliver your ramen 10 minutes faster. I'm like, get out of here. We don't like, the city has a ton of innovation. We don't need this kind of thin innovation. We need thick value, and that's going to be found in rural. Okay. So I'm going to make my case. There's of course a lot of other sectors and trends which are interesting, but the next 4 billion internet users, rural first business models, that's what I'm obsessed about right now. Okay, now Peter, you had your second question about how like the global economy and leadership and nations are coming together. I'm super excited about where the rising consciousness of world leaders are at right now. What do I mean? A lot of them are getting more tech savvy. There is a competition for regulation to be friendly to startups. In fact, a lot of the local banks, they're like, hey, why do these fintech sandboxes get away with all of this, right? Like we can't do any of this stuff like you guys can, right? So a lot of countries are competing to be friendly to startups. They're competing for the smartest startup talent to go to their countries. And they're trying to include a lot of tech thinking into the governments themselves. Okay, second trend, then all this has a confluence to it, is that there is a global awakening of cultural connection. A lot of people may think that, oh, you know, social media is making us so self-focused, we're so narcissistic, and a lot of that is very true. But at the same time, social media is also giving avenues for communities to connect. When we look at all the Discord servers in Web3, people are finding different ways. The cards are being shuffled very differently. Like, since when we have like Crazy Rich Asians, you know, Shang-Chi, we have 88 Rising. Like, I know, like a lot of us on this panel, we've been like global Asians for a long time, and we've not went to pack a cinema to watch a movie like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, any of you watch Everything Everywhere All at Once, you know, so and so forth, right? Like, there's a rising Asian. And this is just one, right? And there are a lot of other like kind of like communities being connected globally. So you look at governments getting more tech savvy and including more, make things tech friendly. You have like global communities of people becoming friends with each other, right? So you've got more community ties. And number 3, you've got more and more of them coming online. Lastly, you've got venture capitalists like us who are ready to back these people who are building companies for the rest of the world. So you put all of that together, like we can no longer underestimate the future. Okay, no one would have thought 10 years ago there's be 1,300 unicorns roaming the world, of which 40% of them are like non-US, right, and non-China, right? So do not underestimate the next 10 years. Okay, so I don't know if that answers the question, Peter, but that'd be my rant for the day.
Well, whether you answer my question or not, it gave me warm and fuzzy that make a lot of money. We're going to have smart, supported government that are very talent focused. And we're going to have global communities that are more diverse and more inclusive than ever before. At least that's the message I got. And I really appreciate, you know, all of you, where your openness and your sharing and so much value that you put out there. You know, for me, I mean, when I come to these things, always make a to-do list. I'm going to plan my trip to Southeast Asia with at least 4 destinations, because I think that's where you guys are at. And then start booking an appointment on your calendar, which I know it'll be harder than getting a seat at the French Laundry around here. I don't know if you guys know the Michelin restaurant here is like a 9 months, 12 months wait. But I'll wait. But anyway, it's about, I think there's an opportunity for us to be open-minded. And I'm going to subscribe to Straits Times and all the other good stuff out there to really start staying on top of things and talk to you guys. But I hope everybody else will do so. Now, in respect for everybody's time, because it is getting late here and you guys have a weekend to start, I would like to formally wrap this up, and but if there's Helen, can you push it to the next slide? I do want to make these things possible. And Mount Jade is a community at the global level, right? And we are trying to still also build a certain community of professionals across the Pacific. And we can't do that without our sponsors, UMC, Deloitte, and you can see it's a lot of the MJ, sort of Mount Jade sort of uncles and the related companies. We're really building this out. I want to thank everybody for being here. And I hope that we will stay connected and see you all again and again on this digital universe that will be created by all four of you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve, for putting this together.